Hello, I am Ron Baker. Welcome to Empowered at Last. Today we're going to go back to a series of answering the questions that you've sent in. I love it when you take the time to send in the questions that you're curious about. Now, if you have been watching or listening to Empowered at Last for very long, you will know that this is a place that I want to have a conversation about everything. Our physical, emotional, mental, sexual, and spiritual selves. The dance that we're having with life. It seems to me that most people have gone through life very much stuck in what I call survival consciousness. Very much focused outside self, inside, in many ways, ruled by fear, shame, and judgment, putting on who we think we have to be in order to get love from outside ourselves. I know that I spent a very long time in my own life stuck in that very survival consciousness. So my goal in doing this show is to create a clear map of self so that we understand what it is we're negotiating, so that we understand how we can work with the dance of life, starting with creating a much more intimate connection to ourselves. And so today, the questions that I have are mostly in the spiritual realm. Now, don't think that that means it does not apply to you in a practical, direct way. It absolutely does. However, when you are in first grade, you have no idea how to be in a conversation with 6th graders, much less 10th graders. And yet, now that you have moved through those grades, you understand that those were always realms of yourself and of life that existed. And so when we talk about spiritual realms, they may not be conversations that you're used to. However, I am really big on keeping things very practical and as simple as possible. But let's plant some seeds about the potential that you hold and that I hold. I like to start out with a context of a map. That all of us exist with 3 levels of consciousness. We have the first 8 years of our lives to set up what I call the soul curriculum of a lifetime. This is your soul plan for this lifetime. In those first 8 years, in the ultimate potential, we are all intended to develop what I call the wonder of child consciousness. Then we are intended to grow and develop and practice all the way through adolescence until we are prepared to negotiate the empowerment of adult consciousness, the second ring out from that first stage. Then, as we spend time, decades actually, developing that adult potential to be truly self-aware and self-empowered. I'll go into details in a minute. We are then brought to the edge of the potential of soul consciousness. So it's the wonder of child consciousness, the empowerment of adult consciousness, and the greatness of soul consciousness. However, I have had the privilege of traveling all over the world for the last 27 years, teaching thousands of people. And it seems to me that most people are stuck in that first ring of consciousness that was supposed to end up being the wonder of child consciousness, and instead, because we have lived on a planet that hasn't had stunning education about the nurturing that we need, about the sacredness of self, then we've ended up in a certain stage of learning that I call survival consciousness. Now, that does not mean it's bad, it's wrong. It means it's a certain stage of learning And there's so much potential to look forward to. What are some of the symptoms of survival consciousness? Looking outside the self. Looking first to mommy and daddy, hoping that they will have the answers, that they will know how to treat you with sacredness, that they will know how to offer you 9 distinct levels of nurturing. If that had been the case, then you would have been ready for trusting receiving, trusting connection, trusting claiming yourself as a sacred individual, unique to everyone around you, but learning about value, mutual value between your caregivers and yourself. If all of that education had been in place, then we would have ended up in wonder of child consciousness. Now that is not remotely what I ended up in after the first 8 years of my life. However, I can now look back and see, oh, those first 8 years were when my soul, already inside me from the beginning, even though it's that third outer ring of consciousness, it's still informing who you are throughout your life. Just like the adult part of you was always in there, but you had no idea how to tap that when you were 6 or even 10. So the soul sets up this curriculum of challenges and opportunities in the first 8 years. In those years, you end up developing the foundation of self, which is your third dimensional self. Physical, emotional, mental. Those 3 energy centers from the base of the spine all the way up to the solar plexus were initially activated in the first 8 years of your life. Now, if you did not receive 9 distinct levels of consistent nurturing that championed you and taught you how to connect to your inner self and to trust giving and receiving, the exchange of connection and intimacy, starting out with mommy and daddy and then expanding to others. I know from having lived in the same world as you that I've never met anyone who got that solid 9 levels of nurturing education. So when we don't get it, the setups are quite unique, but we end up with variations of fear, shame, and judgment held in that first ring. Because of that, we end up trying to figure it out, trying to figure out who we need to be, how do I have to act, what choices do I have to make in order to get that first goal, which is to be loved by mommy, daddy initially, or whoever your caregivers were. I know we have a lot of different setups of families. If we had gotten that love, we would have fulfilled the first goal. I can receive. I am lovable. I am worthy. I matter. If we don't get that in those first 8 years as a foundation, and we end up with variations of fear, shame, and judgment, then we continue looking for what we believe is the fulfillment of that first goal, to be loved, to know that I matter. And so what happens is that we get caught in a description of self that is a child's impression of who you are, of what you deserve, simply because that's what the experience of those first 8 years was teaching you. Well, if we decide this is what I deserve, and this is who I have to be, and this is the mask that I have to put on in order to try and get others to love me, What we haven't considered is that most often we're trying to get love from other wounded children also stuck in survival consciousness, even if they're 30, 50, or 90 years old. If we don't get a deeper education about self, then we end up trapped in the limitations of the third dimension, our physical, emotional, mental self, and we think that's it. Well, believe it or not, this first question, which is a spiritual one, is how will we relate to others differently when we expand from third dimensional consciousness to fifth dimensional consciousness? Now, this is a big subject. I could go on and on and on about the education about what is fifth dimension. We hear people throw around the lingo sometimes, but quite often people are missing the education about what it actually means. So we are so much more than a first grader, but we don't know that when we're in first grade. And then when we get to 10th grade or college, we expand into a ton more of our potential, a ton more of our consciousness. And then when we look back as an adult to college, we are thinking, oh my goodness, those are babies. They're in college, but they are babies compared to adult consciousness. So now let's imagine that your consciousness continues to have tons more potential, spiritual potential, beyond the third dimension potential. Now, I could choose to only pay attention to addition and subtraction that I learned in first grade and never expand into advanced math or medium math, algebra and trigonometry, etc. I don't have to expand, but I have the potential to explore those levels. Well, that's a metaphor for third dimension only being aware of primitive potential as a human being. But I could expand and explore much more advanced consciousness, which we'll call soul consciousness. My goodness, there's so many arenas that I could go to. Let's just keep it simple as possible as an introduction. Fifth dimension is the realm of the soul. It is an energetic awareness that is so much more expansive than just being focused on the third dimension and the physical world and thinking that we're going to truly be fulfilled just by getting physical things, a house and money and a relationship. Now those are stunning places to plug in, to build a physical foundation. But we are so much more. We are an experiential depth of intimacy and connection that is so profound. Think of the love that you were capable of when you reached your college years or your 20s, when you dated someone, versus the level of experience that you felt about your friends when you were in first, second, and third grade. This is a primitive metaphor, but it actually makes great sense. If you learn how to create connection with you, if you learn how to go back inside and face the soul curriculum of your first 8 years that left you with fear, shame, and judgment, and you learn how to nurture each of those things, you naturally begin to awaken and expand and open to levels of connection and intimacy that are profound. The fifth dimension, the soul dimension, knows that you hold all of that potential. The fifth dimension is waiting for us to grow and show up and explore and to seek deeper truths and more complete information about who we are and how life works. The School of Self-Mastery that I have created and been teaching at for a quarter century literally provides a practical, grounded way to get in touch with each of these rings of consciousness, to get in touch with yourself in a nurturing, sacred way, to get in touch with a level of connection and intimacy with yourself and therefore with others. So the question was, how will we relate to one another differently when we open to fifth dimensional awareness rather than third dimensional awareness? Well, the great news is it's not one or the other. Just like your child potential is still held within you. Hopefully you are still very childlike. I did not say childish. Childlike in your wonder of life and exploration and constant growth. Hopefully that is true in your adult life. And the same is true when we expand into fifth dimensional awareness and we sustain an even more complete awareness of the third dimension. There's been a lot of spiritual talk that we will expand into fifth dimensional beings and wondering if we'll even be here in the physical third dimension. Well, that is a much more complete answer, and I'm not going to try and go into that in the podcast. However, those are the things that I teach in my School of Self-Mastery. Not just how to get in touch with yourself, but how to understand the bigger picture of life, how to understand yourself as a multidimensional being, and it is all grounded and practical, opening into more heart, more connection and intimacy, more capacity to love, starting out with receiving, asserting and sharing, connecting in a sense of acceptance and compassion. These are the things that are possible. So as you open more and more and begin to integrate fifth dimensional capacity, you simply relate to one another with way more safety, authenticity, willingness, depth of sharing every facet of your being. I remember one time, way back when, my niece was in high school and she said, "I don't think that love is actually possible," because she wasn't experiencing this kind of exchange, giving and receiving, sharing self, even self-awareness. And I said, "So please tell me what you mean." She said, "I don't think anybody feels safe enough to share who they really are, or that others know them fully, authentically." I said, "I'm so glad to be able to tell you, I know it's entirely possible to love," I didn't say as a third and fifth dimensional being, but it's what I meant, fully possible to love authentically, courageously, honestly, sharing and knowing one another. That is the life that I live. And I'm also happy to tell you, since I put the story on the table, that she has grown from high school into her early adulthood and is also discovering deeper and deeper connection and sharing and intimacy, growing into the potential of love. Soul greatness is where we're all headed. And so I'm going to close with this for now and say thank you for sharing. Please share these episodes with your friends and family and reach out. Let me know what questions you have. I would be more than happy to answer them in future podcasts. That's all for now. Have a great week. I close as always with choose well, live fully, and by all means be good to you.